Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of the MoeGamer podcast. I'm Pete Davison from MoeGamer.net and as always I'm joined by my good friend Chris Kasky from MrGildofPixels.com. How are you today, Chris?
I'm doing well, Pete. How are you?
Yeah, not bad. I'm coming at you live from the building site that is my house at the moment.
Oh, yeah, you're going through some renos, aren't you?
My wife Andy has been getting a bit bored with the whole lockdown situation. So one morning I came downstairs to find that she'd knocked a big hole in our staircase and was just like, oh, I just wanted to see if there was a banister underneath here. And there wasn't. So then she decided she had to buy an angle grinder and take the entire wall out. So she's done that. And she sanded down what is left of what is going to become our new banister. Took up all the carpet in the hall, has taken all the carpet off the stairs and is in the process of sanding them all down so we can have a nice running up them. So yeah, we're having some fairly significant renovations going on at the minute, and it was all because my wife got a bit bored.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, I'm staying out of the way. I'm terrified of power tools, especially angle grinders. Angle grinders are fucking terrifying.
That's hilarious.
Oh dear. Yes, I am not handy in the slightest. I do not wear the DIY trousers in this house at all. If you put a hammer in my hand, I will hammer something into myself before I will hammer it into what it's supposed to be going into. I can just about take a computer apart, but that's about it. I'm built for creativity and art, darling.
Yeah. I'm fairly handy, but you've got to really coax me into it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like something has to break for me to I don't like of my own initiative start like ripping things apart and rebuilding things for the sake of doing it. Like something has to be in need of repair. Then I put the belt on and get to work, but like it's never like occurred to me to create work for myself.
Yeah. Yeah, no, my wife has been watching a lot of like YouTube renovation videos and stuff, which is sort of people getting old rusty pieces of crap and turning them into new not rusty pieces of crap. And there was a show that James May did as well a while back where he basically got a thing, took it to pieces and then tried to put it back together again. It was surprisingly compelling viewing actually, but
I love that kind of stuff.
But anyway, right, we are here to talk about video games. As usual, we're going to follow our three-part format today. We're going to start with a bit of talk of what little news has been going on recently, because obviously with the ongoing worldwide situation, to euphemistically refer to it as everyone does, there's not been a ton of things going on, but there have been a few things announced, so we'll talk a bit about those first. Then we'll talk a bit about what we've been playing recently, and then finally we will move on to our main topic for today, which is a return to a topic we just last discussed about a year ago, I think, which is sort of favourite or most interesting RPG battle systems. So we've both got plenty to talk about there, so look forward to that in the third segment. So let's kick off with the news then. So, first story is very much one for you, because I know you're a big Toaplan fan. So, the first 4 Toaplan games coming to modern platforms have been announced. So, well, tell me more.
Yeah, so M2, who we've all come to love for their exciting porting abilities, right?
Yep.
have recently announced the first 4 titles that they're going to be bringing to modern consoles from the old Toaplan back catalog. Mm-hmm. Which will be Flying Shark, which is also known as Sky Shark, or Hishozame in Japan, Twin Cobra, Truxton 2, and Outzone. I'm not really super familiar with most of these, mainly just Truxton 2, or Tatsujin O in Japan. But that game is so good. So Truxton is kind of the shooter that is kind of famous because the bombs are just like laughing skulls that like rip across the screen. But Truxton 2 is just kind of an example of what I would call like the pinnacle of like super challenging but well-paced shooters, like right at the edge before bullet hell started becoming a thing.
Yeah.
When I think about like the kind of deliberately paced shooters that like Raiden kind of was the champion of, Truxton is very much that. And what makes Truxton really interesting / infuriating is it has a checkpoint system. Like, if you die, you don't start right where you died, like in most shooters.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So you actually have to be good at it. You cannot credit feed Truxton, because you'll never get past the checkpoints. So it is really challenging, beautiful pixel art, really interesting aesthetic, because it's just like a traditional kind of space atmosphere, but it really ties like the skull theme into a lot of like the enemy designs and the items and backgrounds and stuff. So yeah, it's just a really great shooter.
Cool. I think I've played Flying Shark before, because I think I had an Atari ST port of that. So I mean, God knows how faithful to the arcade original that was, but yeah, that's definitely familiar looking at the screenshots of it now, and the sort of World War One biplane aesthetic that's got going on. I'm pretty sure I've played that. I'm not familiar with the others though, apart from Truxton 2 by reputation.
I'm trying to think if Flying Shark was... There was a game on the Genesis in the States called Fire Shark, and I think that's also the same game.
Oh, okay.
And if that's the game I'm thinking of, I freaking love it too, because you're like a World War One biplane that gets like a flamethrower.
Yeah. According to Wikipedia, so take that with a pinch of salt, if you will, Fire Shark was the sequel that came out in 1989.
Okay. Yeah. There we go. All right, yeah, so I've never played Flying Shark, but I have played Fire Shark, and that's mad good. That's one of those, like, Genesis games that goes for, like, ungodly amounts of money. And, like, it was, like, the worst release ever, because it was, like, literally the label on the cart is just white with black printing on it. There's like no color graphics or anything. It's like, oh, it's like you pay like $150 for a cart only copy of it, and then you get this Genesis cart.
It looks like a bootleg, yeah.
Yeah. It's awesome. But yeah, Toaplan stuff is just in general wonderful. So this is great news that these games are going to be accessible again.
Yeah, cool. Excited to check them out for sure. All right, continuing on with shoot-'em-up news, in fact. The Thunder Force AC, which is the arcade version of Thunder Force 3, is coming to the West on May the 28th. I think it's already out in Japan, and the use of Japanese text in it is pretty minimal. So if you have access to the Japanese eShop and you can't wait until May the 28th, you can download it now, I believe. But yeah, this is an arcade version of an already monstrously difficult shoot-'em-up, so don't expect to ever complete this ever, I guess. But yeah, like the previous Sega Ages version of Thunder Force 4, which came out, which is very good. They've added a few bits and pieces to this. So besides the original ship that was in Thunder Force 3, they've also brought in a bunch of other ships from other games as well. So you've got the ships from, I think, Thunder Force 4 in there as well, and all sorts of other things. So there's lots of different ways to play and different combinations of weapons and stuff. And again, as with all the Sega Ages releases, there's leaderboards. So there's an expert leaderboard for playing on the default settings, and then there's a freestyle leaderboard for anyone who's playing on any other combination of settings as well. So it's mostly meaningless, but it does mean you can sort of compare your scores against other people, even if you're not playing on sort of super hardcore mode. And it seems that this is sort of following the trend that G-Lock has been doing as well, which is they're providing a sort of virtual arcade cabinet option with this as well, with a sort of curved CRT and sort of screen filters and so on. So if you want to play it as if you're standing in front of an arcade machine, you can do that, but then you can also make it fill the screen if you want to as well. So
that's always fun.
Yes. Okay, continuing on, we got a surprise announcement from Nintendo the other day. They just dropped this news on Twitter out of nowhere. They said a new Paper Mario game is coming to Switch, and it's called Paper Mario the Origami King, and it's coming out on July the 17th, so that's pretty soon. So they've obviously been working on this on the quiet for a while, and they just thought, hey, we may as well tell people about this. But yeah, this looks cool. So it's got a combination of the sort of flat 2D sort of sticker style of Paper Mario sprites, but then it's also got these sort of more three-dimensional origami figures as well. So it seems like there's a core thing about it is kind of the conflict between 2D and 3D almost. For people who like the older versions of Paper Mario. Things like the partner characters and stuff are back. There's an interesting looking sort of ring style battle system, they call it, with sort of positioning and all sorts of things. So there's trailers and videos online for that now. So looking good.
I'll be interested to see how this turns out, because the last 2 Paper Mario games weren't particularly well liked because they weren't very traditional in terms of like the way their battle systems worked. There was a lot of focus on like single-use items.
Yeah. Part of the problem with the last couple of Paper Marios is something we talk about a lot, which is that people were coming to them wanting them to be something that they weren't. They were coming to them wanting them to be the N64 version or Thousand Year Door or whatever, or the GameCube version, and they weren't that, and so people got pissed off with it. But they were their own games in their own right, and there are people who like them. I know that my wife Andy played through the one on Wii several times because she really likes that one. I know people who like Sticker Star on 3DS, even though that's probably the worst received of all of them. I know people who've liked Color Splash on Wii U, so yeah, it as with anything, take it on its own merits when it comes out. If it happens to be a bit like the older ones, great. If it doesn't, then just deal with it.
Yeah. I mean, from my understanding, like Sticker Star and Color Splash weren't really trying to be RPGs. They were more trying to be like adventure games with a combat mechanic. So if you think of them that way, the battles were more like puzzles to be solved and less like traditional RPG battles. This new one appears to be going back to like the Thousand Year Door style, more of like a traditional RPG. So we'll see what happens with that. All are valid, but I know what my preference is.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. All right. Moving along. We've got a story that you posted here that I haven't been following at all, but this looks kind of interesting. A game called Nexomon, which is a sort of Pokemon-like from Vivo Interactive, is coming to consoles, and that's coming to Switch, PlayStation 4 and Xbox One in summer 2020. So yeah, tell me a bit more about this. What's attracted your attention on this one?
I don't really know much about it either. I had never really heard of this until I saw this announcement this week, but it just appears to be a fairly competent Pokemon-like. If you look at the field graphics and the town graphics, it just kind of harkens back to the like late DS Pokemon game, like the last 2D Pokemon games, like really decent high definition 2D sprite work on a semi 3D plane. The battles kind of have that flash animation look to the enemy characters and the monsters, but yeah, I mean, if you like Pokemon style games, which we did a whole episode about how cool monster collecting RPGs are, it's just a new Pokemon style RPG with 300 different monsters to collect and train and evolve and what have you. So I'm looking forward to giving this a try. Hopefully it gets a physical press from one of the houses. P-Cube is involved in the publication, so it's most of the stuff they've been involved with has gotten physical copies, if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, just never say no to a new monster collecting game if it appears to be competently made. And this looks like it's got a lot of really good polish on it. So
yeah. Cool. All right, continuing on, just recently released, if you're yet to jump on the Galgun bandwagon and you don't mind going digital with it, both Galgun Double Piece and Galgun 2 have been released in bundles that give you almost all of the downloadable content that's available for both of them. Worth noting that none of that DLC is particularly essential. It's all just new costumes and stuff. And I believe in the case of Galgun, you don't get the ones that the DLC packs that affect boob size, but yeah, you have a lot more customization options with those in place. So yeah, if you get to play Galgun or Galgun 2, then that's a good way to jump in and have a play with them.
When I first saw the news, I was like, oh, maybe they'll get released in a bundle on cart. No, it's just digital bundles, but it's still great that it's available. Yeah. Well, some people are happy to go digital only, but not me, damn it. Anyway,
Returning briefly to the sort of Pokemon-like theme, there was a game you spotted the other day called Cassette Beasts, which is a really cool-looking game that's got a kind of combination of sort of tilt-shifted cube-based backgrounds and then lovely pixel art characters on top of it. So this is from a studio called Byton Studio, who previously developed a Legend of Zelda clone called Lena's Inception. And the concept of this one is that you're recording monsters' data onto cassettes and then playing back those cassettes to bring them into battles and so on. So, yeah, it sounds like an interesting concept, and the aesthetic of this is really nice, certainly.
Yeah, it's like what if Pokemon plus Octopath Traveler.
Yeah, yeah,
Like the monsters are these beautiful sprites, very much in the classic like Game Boy Advance era Pokemon vein. And then they're plastered on this 3D plane where they look like little cutouts, and like, I just love it.
Yeah, that's cool. So I really like the look of this, and the GBA look is spot on. Just sort of the kind of, I don't know, the kind of look at like the text and stuff as well is spot on for GBA as well. Just sort of the size of the pixels they're using and so on. They've really sort of gone to town on making that look authentic, but sort of also updating it with this 3D stuff in the background as well. So, yeah, very cool. All right, moving on. Pico Interactive, who, if you're not familiar with them, they are a company that has been busily hoovering up rights for old games that have sort of either been abandoned, or the rights have been in limbo, or the original license holders aren't doing anything with them. They've acquired the rights to a game called Rage of the Dragons, which is an old Playmore game. That was originally supposed to be a Double Dragon series sequel of sorts, but ran into some licensing problems, so it ended up as a homage, to say the least, and it's fairly notorious for that. I'm not familiar with this at all, but apparently it is reasonably well known in the fighting game community.
It's
as
one of my favorites.
Sort of, yeah, it looks like fun, and it's got sort of lovely 2D sprite work and stuff in there, and some gorgeous backgrounds. So yeah, that's cool. The other interesting thing about this, of course, is that Pico Interactive have been partnering with Blaze, the manufacturers of the Evercade handheld console that is coming out very soon at the time of recording. There's already a Pico Interactive cartridge available for the Evercade when it launches, so hopefully this will find its way onto a future collection of the stuff that they've been doing on there as well. So yeah, all very exciting to see these old games getting another chance.
I have a soft spot for this game in particular because when I used to collect for the Geo, Rage of the Dragons was the first game that I bought new for the Geo. So like I actually had like the full arcade set with like the stickers for the cabinet, like the marquee cards, like everything. Like it was one of my most prized possessions.
Oh, I bet. Yeah, I bet. Yes, yeah, excited to check that out for sure. All right, continuing on, surprise, Scarlet Nexus, which was announced at the whole Xbox reveal thing a little while back, is not actually an Xbox exclusive. It's also coming to PS4, PS5, and PC. So this is the sort of anime-style action RPG from Bandai Namco. So I guess you could think of it as a spiritual successor to Code Vein in some ways. But it looks like it's got a more sort of futuristic bent to it. You're sort of fighting against mutants and that sort of thing, and there's a kind of sort of ruined city look going on about it, whereas Code Vein was a bit more kind of gothic. So yeah, this is looking cool. The Xbox version is going to make use of the new Xbox Smart Delivery system as well. So if you buy a digital version on current model Xbox Ones, if you then upgrade to Xbox Series X, you then basically get the Xbox Series X version for free as well. So that's one pretty cool thing that Microsoft are doing, although obviously you can't do that with physical releases, which is a bit of a shame. But yeah, even so, if you are not upgrading immediately to the new Xbox, then you can buy this game now and then enjoy an enhanced version of it at some point in the future for free.
Yeah, I remember when this was first announced at the Xbox event. Everyone was like, "Oh, why is this game Xbox exclusive?" I'm like, just wait. There's no way this cel-shaded, stylized anime action RPG isn't also coming to PlayStation. And then 2 days later, I was like, see, just relax, relax.
Yeah, God, no, nothing like that is ever going to be an Xbox exclusive ever.
It's like sending it off to die. Why is... I don't usually get into the console debate, but like, why does Xbox even still exist?
I've no idea. People seem to be feeling pretty positive about the new one.
Tech heads are. That's the difference, right? Like, yes, it's already been like discussed. Like, yes, the Xbox Series X is a more powerful piece of hardware than the PlayStation 5 is going to be. Who gives a shit? Like, this isn't PC town. Like, console gamers are not power guy. Like, at the end of the day, content is king.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is the same thing that sort of happened with the Unreal Engine 5 reveal the other day as well, because the Unreal Engine 5 demo was very impressive, yes. But like the demonstration of what they were doing with it is it was a character that was jumping up and grabbing ledges and climbing up onto the ledges and sliding in between narrow gaps and stuff like that. And this is all stuff we've seen like in the last couple of weeks in Unreal Engine 4. So, I mean, again, a lot of devs are very excited about Unreal Engine 5 because apparently the sort of development pipeline that it opens up to them is much more sort of streamlined and good for that. So, but that's all behind the scenes stuff. Again, as you say, content is king. It's going to be all about what makes games made with that engine good, and that's nothing to do with the engine really. It's about the sort of creativity of the people who are actually making the games. So,
yes. Laymen don't get excited about tech.
Yeah.
Like 16-year-olds going to GameStop don't get excited about tech.
Mm-hmm.
They want the game. They don't care about your teraflops.
Yeah.
They just care about like playing video games potentially with their friends. Like that's, like the games are what matters.
Yes, indeed. And on that note then, lovely segue into Clubhouse games for Nintendo Switch.
Hell yeah.
Clubhouse Games, or 51 Worldwide Classics as it's known elsewhere. I'm very confused by the title of this worldwide, much like with the DS version that had 3 different names depending on where you lived in the world. But anyway, this game is coming out towards the beginning of June, I think, and it's a collection of board and parlor and card games for Nintendo Switch with a strong focus on local multiplayer, although there are online multiplayer options for at least some of the games in the collection. But one of the cool things about it is that they are adding a free app on the eShop for local multiplayer. So this is a bit like what Namco did with Pac-Man Versus on the Namco Museum collection for Switch, which is where only one person needs to own the actual game in order to start a multiplayer session. Everyone else can download this free app and then join that multiplayer session and enjoy the games. So this is basically sort of a replacement for what the DS version did, which was that it had the download play functionality, where you could connect 2 DSs to each other wirelessly. The sort of the player joining the game would then download just the data of the game that you're going to play, and you can play together using just one cartridge. So this is sort of the modern equivalent of that, I guess. But that's really cool news because it means that you can have multi-Switch local multiplayer games with only one cart, which is great.
I didn't also realize that this has got a budget price tag.
Yeah.
So I didn't know that. I was like, I don't know if I want to pay $60 for this. I'm gonna wait. I just looked up the price. At least in the US, it's launching at $40. I will pay $40 for Drunken Connect 4 on my 67-inch TV with my friends. Like this is an investment that I will make.
Yeah, definitely. I'm looking forward to this because this is something that that me and Andy will be able to play together as well. Because Andy plays some games, but sort of anything that's like sort of shooting or fighting, that obviously the sort of experience level between us is so different that it's not a huge amount of fun for either of us, because it ends up being like either one wins by luck or one of us ends up dominating the other one completely, and that's not really any fun after a little while.
And by that I assume Andy wipes the floor with you you every time.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm just looking at what it costs over here, because I don't think it's very much over here either. I ordered the physical release of this, and it's £29.85 over here, so a lot cheaper than sort of your average new release. And it will have that sort of typical Nintendo polish on it as well, because it's a first-party Nintendo game. So yeah, looking forward to this a lot.
I don't know why I love Connect 4 so much, but just the fact that there's Connect 4 on it, I'm like, I'm in!
Oh, yeah. Oh, Connect 4 is a great game for swearing at your friends on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, I've almost lost friendships over Connect 4. If they could only figure out a way to get virtual Kerplunk in there, then we'd be, with like proper physics emulation, then it would be over.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, looking forward to this, and depending on the online multiplayer support, we'll have to get a few games or something in as well, for sure.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Okay, that's pretty much all the news we have to talk about for the minute, unless there's anything else you want to bring up.
No, I think that's it. These are dry times, understandably
Indeed.
so, but at least we got 2 awesome Pokemon likes coming our way.
Yes,
with
that's true.
different styles and aesthetics. Can't beat that.
Indeed, and as you say, the possibility of Drunken Connect 4 in the very near future. So that's what video games are for, damn it. Right. Okay, let's take a short break then, and then we'll come back in just a moment and talk about what we've been playing recently. So we'll see you in a moment. Welcome back. For our second segment, we're going to talk about what we've been playing lately. So, what have you been up to, Chris?
I have been playing Blasphemous.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so Blasphemous is really cool. I mean, I hate to always be the guy who just describes games in the context of, like, other games, but really Blasphemous is an attempt to recreate some of the environmental feelings and kind of some of the key factors that define From Software's Souls games, like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, etc.
Yes.
And recreate that within the confines of a Metroid-style 2D open platformer. Mm-hmm. Gorgeous pixel art. Really stiff challenge to the combat, and I'm just really enjoying it. It's kind of it's basically creating kind of what you expect out of one of those map screen based open field platformers. All the levels are interconnected. There's new passageways to unlock as you like loop around. But kind of the big focus in Blasphemous, as with Dark Souls, is to make enemy encounters, each enemy encounter is like potentially dangerous. So like the fields aren't littered with like trash enemies. Yeah. Like all combat is potentially pretty stiff. So like even like the garbage enemies that die in a few hits can take like a solid quarter of your life bar away if they're carrying a big enough weapon. So like there's a parry mechanic, a dodge slide. And you really just have to learn the enemy attack patterns and timing and to use the parry correctly. There are enemies that carry shields that really the only way to defeat them is to parry them. There's no way around it. And it's just kind of creating this brutal, oppressive atmosphere where like your survival is like 100% predicated on your skill, which isn't something I've encountered in a 2D setting like this before. Mm-hmm. in terms of like melee combat. So it's been a really interesting game to play. It's a really slow go for me because I'm just not great at this kind of stuff, but the world itself is so interesting from like a narrative and a visual perspective. That I'm just compelled to keep like grinding away at it, even though I'm like senselessly bad at it.
Oh, that's cool.
The
Do they do like the Souls thing of sort of burying lore in it and sort of not making stuff too explicit and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so like the kind of the whole setting of Blasphemous is very much I don't want to say it's like Judeo-Christian, but like it's clearly inspired and shaped after like a very like stern Old Testament kind of Judeo-Christian mythology. It's like shaped around that sort of imagery. Yeah. So there's a lot of like angelic imagery and like cherubs and like the main character you see is like faceless, and he has one of those very like patrician masks that looks like it was like carved by like Michelangelo. Like everything is like everything's covered in like crowns of thorns, and there's a lot of like crucifixion imagery. It's just kind of like the darkest tones that you can extrapolate from that like Old Testament like biblical stuff. And the whole world is kind of shaped around that, and everything is like the whole world and the mythology is all kind of shaped around this kind of like apocalypse that happened, but like within the world, like people are grateful for the apocalypse, like they call it the miracle. And like you like the player character are the quote penitent one, and like you start the game on a mountain of corpses that all look like you. Like the first scene is that, so it's like there's a whole lot of just like lore just in the stage design, and like every scene is very beautifully crafted with like a lot going on in the backgrounds. And just like in Dark Souls, like every item you pick up, you can press a button and there's a lore, like a story associated with it.
Okay.
There are some items, there's many different types of collectibles. So like you get enhancements for your sword, you have a rosary bead, a chain of rosary beads, and you collect rosary beads that have different effects. So like what beads you put on your rosary have different effects for your combat. And every one of those has a lore. There's a whole subset of items that are lore-only items, which are, I don't know how familiar you are with reliquary, in like the way that like in the church, like the reliquary are like artifacts that are usually like connected to like saints or like miracles that have happened in the past. And oftentimes reliquary are actual physical remains of like a saint or an important figure, like a finger bone or something. So like there's a whole subset of items that you collect in this game that are like the finger bone of like Saint Francis the Pious, and like when you get it, it has no effect on the game. It's literally just a collectible with like lore, and then you like open it up and it'll have like his teachings or like what happened to him or like how he died, like why he's important to the world. It's like the sense of atmosphere and world building in this game are absolutely tremendous. Yeah. And everything is just steeped in like 70 layers of like ambiguity and mystery. And I just really appreciate its like supreme dedication to like its world building and its aesthetic. Like the way the characters speak is very specific, and it almost like reminds me of like I always talk on here about how huge a fan I am of specifically the translation work that's done on Yasumi Matsuno games, like Final Fantasy 12 and Final Fantasy Tactics, and they endeavor to have that kind of like old world speech, and they keep that consistent in localizations of Matsuno games. Blasphemous is a very similar feel, and then it does that with like the biblical sounding speech.
Oh, that's cool.
Everyone you talk to, it just sounds like you're having like a sermon delivered to you, and like like when people say goodbye to you, it's not just like good luck on your adventure. It's like they very like calmly and like sadly say like sorrowful be thy heart, penitent one, and they say stuff like that. It's just, I love games that are so dedicated to their setting. Like this is. It's just been a real pleasure to play, even when I want to hurl the controller across the room. And like there's little shit too, like I don't know how familiar you are with the concept of like flagellation, like self-flagellation in like extremely like hardcore biblical sects. But like there are enemies that like self-flagellate. Like if you stand there long enough, they'll kill themselves. Like it's stuff like that. That's like, this is really cool. Like super dedicated to the aesthetic and the world, but also tied to the mechanics, because the enemies will literally, like, you see them hit themselves with their, like, barbed whips, and you see them flash that they're taking damage. Like, it registers the damage they do to themselves. Like, how neat is that?
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, so really, really enjoying Blasphemous. It's a slow go, but I also feel like it might be a short game. Because, like, in my first playthrough, like, at the end of the day, after playing for, like, an hour, like, I brought the map up, and I was like, it was like 10% of the map completed already after like 1 hour. So I think it's a very small map and a very short game, but then the length really comes from the challenge, because you have to do everything like 30,000 times, and the checkpoints are like super far apart. And if you die when you're reincarnated at your last checkpoint, you're in a different state. Your MP bar is cut down, and you gain experience at like 50% rate until you return to the point of your death and like reclaim your spirit. So it's got all that kind of stuff in it. So I think a lot of the length of the game really comes from the challenge and like beating your head against it until you memorize the patterns of each room. But yeah, really, really liking it. It's got its own unique identity. It's pulling stuff that's worked from other games and just kind of being a very successful example of what it is.
Yeah, sounds really cool. Sounds really cool. I know. I remember when this first came out, there were a lot of people who were making very happy, positive noises about it. I haven't looked into it that much, but I just know it. I just know it as the pointy hat man game.
Yeah, that's exactly. I mean, like, super disclaimer: it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
The aesthetic of it is very oppressive, very violent. It's gory. It's like death everywhere, and like just like. Impaled bodies on spikes and like the backgrounds, and like usually like one of the bosses is just like a giant like fetus. Yeah. That, like, it's like, if you're not into this kind of like if you didn't listen to a lot of heavy metal in high school, you're probably not prepared for this game.
Yeah.
But I can see why people might be off-put by it. In fact, like, I remember seeing a lot of discussions about it in like forums and stuff, and people have just been like, this game like looks like it's cursed. Like, this game looks like a creepypasta. Like, it looks like a game that if you play it, you will be haunted.
Yeah.
Like, and that's kind of the feel it has. Like, it's really unsettling. So, like, if you're not into that, don't play it. but I am really enjoying it. Like, I'm a horror guy, so, like, I'm really just loving it. And they get it.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah, well, it sounds like they've really nailed the sort of atmosphere and feel of that, so... Cool. All right, is that all, or is there anything else you've been up to?
I've also been playing the new Sakura Wars.
Oh yeah, tell me more.
Which is pretty amazing.
Good,
so
glad to hear it.
I love Sakura Wars. I've been obsessed with Sakura Wars, or Sakura Taizen, the franchise, since I was like 13. We've only ever gotten 2 Sakura Wars games translated in the West. Which I think which is this new one, and I think the 5th one.
Yeah, that was the Wii one, right?
Yeah, it was on Wii and PS2. It was localized as Sakura Wars So Long My Love.
Yeah.
Sakura Wars is really interesting because it's essentially a visual novel. But the idea of it is, it's a visual novel, but it's produced with a massive budget that like normal visual novels would never hope to be able to have. So like, instead of being a visual novel in the traditional sense that you're like making menu selections and like, it's a visual novel like where you actually are running around in a 3D world. It's not like, oh, I've found What's Her Name's magazine, I should bring it to her. And then it's just like a fade away. And then the next scene is that. It's like, no, you find What's Her Name's magazine, then you actually have to go in the world and run and take it to her. So it's like almost like a fully interactive visual novel produced with a high level budget. So it's kind of cool in that respect. And it just by doing that, it's more intriguing to me than other traditional visual novels, just because that added level of interactivity helps me feel a bit more connected to it.
Yeah.
And the choice making and the exploring the world. Like, I feel more like I'm playing a game, so like I get more into it.
Yeah.
It's very pretty, the new one. Like, reflective surfaces. Like the first scene where you get to control your characters like in like a bus station, and just the floor is like this polished marble, and it's like reflecting from like the skylights above. and it's a really pretty game, just well made. The characters are charming.
Yeah, it's got a very distinctive sort of character design about it as well, hasn't it?
Yeah,
I find.
Yeah, the characters were designed by, I don't know the artist's name because I'm not a huge fan of his specifically, but it's the guy who did Bleach, which is a very popular anime / manga. So like he's very well known. I don't like Bleach, so I don't know him very well personally. Yeah. But like fans of that, of him are, he has a very distinct style. So that was kind of a big selling point for this game, that he was doing the character design. But yeah, the whole thing of Sakura Wars is, of all Sakura Wars, is the notion that it's a steampunk, like 20s setting where there's demons, like attacking stuff, and the only way to fight the demons are these spirit-powered steampunk robots, that are piloted by people who have spirit energy abilities, and everyone who can do this, they are also required by like the outfits that give the robots to them, that they also have to like not only protect people physically by fighting with the robots, but like they also have to be engaged in the world around them artistically in some way, in order to also bolster the hearts of the people that they protect. Yeah. So traditionally in Sakura Wars, that has always manifested itself as a theater troupe. So during the visual novel segments, you are being the manager of the theater and like helping to run the theater and make these characters interact. There's obviously a romance element where like there's always like the girls that are in the theater troupe and you're the only guy, and like you have to like, you can make try to romance the one you like the most, and there's different endings for each girl depending on who you've achieved love with, and then the social interaction elements, very similar to what people understand from Persona, carry into the combat. Yeah. Traditionally, Sakura Wars has been a turn-based strategy game. The new one is like a hack and slash action RPG, but it's still the same idea. So whoever you are building the greatest rapport with will perform best with you in the action segments, have bolstered stats, different moves. So it's just neat. It's a comfort food game. It's just very, very charming, and like the characters are very sweet and well-meaning, and I'm just kind of enjoying getting lost in the world of this beautiful steampunk Japan, and it's just cute and nice. And the girls are nice and quirky, and yeah, it's just a really cool time. And if you love the franchise, this game is very specifically, it's the new one, which is just called Sakura Wars in the West, but in Japan it's Shin Sakura Wars, like New Sakura Wars. It's designed to kind of be a tribute to and celebration to the history of the franchise. So the idea is that it takes place 10 years later of the events of the original 5. Yeah. So the manager of the theater that you work for is like one of the girls from the original cast, like just 10 years older. Okay. You can collect bromides in the game, like Lunar style, of like the girls, but not just the girls in the new game. You can find bromides of the characters from the old games, like all throughout the history of the series.
Oh, cool.
So like, there's lots of little like nods to the history and legacy of the series, because Sakura Wars has been around since the Saturn. And there's been anime series and movies. Like, it's a very popular franchise in Japan, but it's less known here. So yeah, just really enjoying that. It's kind of a feel-good thing, but it is one of those games where you can go hours without really encountering what would traditionally be considered gameplay. Yeah. So be very aware that you'll spend like 2 hours talking to people. Yeah. So that and then have like a 20-minute action sequence. It's essentially the game is structured like an anime. So like there's actual episodes. Okay. And it plays out just like an anime. So like there's a conflict or a problem that needs to be solved through the visual novel segments, and then each episode is punctuated by the action sequence. Like, oh no, the demons are here just as we're about to solve the problem, and then like it's literally structured on purpose to be like watching an anime series.
Yeah.
There's an intermission where the commercial would be that allows you to save, and then the next segment plays, then your action sequence. It's very cool. If you like anime, it feels like playing an anime that you also get to make interactive choices and lead the narrative with. So it's really cool.
Cool. Sounds great. Well, I picked up a copy of that because I'm going to dive into the series at some point. But yeah, I'm glad to hear that it's come out well. A lot of people were sort of a bit worried about this with its sort of shift from strategy RPG to action gameplay, but it sounds like they've really done a good job with it. So that's great to hear.
Yeah, and the action gameplay is good. So it's not, not like crappy. It's good, but it's not the focus of the game. So in a lot of ways, it doesn't matter that much. Also, if you've ever wanted to learn how to play Hanafuda cards.
Oh, okay.
There's a whole Hanafuda card mini game in it. Yeah. Where you can play Hanafuda cards with the girls. Because one of the coolest things about it is, even though it's like 1920s steampunk, you have like a cell phone. But it's like it's green screen. Yeah. Like the Pip-Boy in Fallout.
Oh, cool.
And when you pull it up, it powers on, and it makes that like hum that like an old tube that like an old tube television makes when you turn it on. Like your cell phone does that. Yeah. It's super awesome.
That's awesome. I love that noise.
Yeah, so do I. It's really cool. Yeah, so that's Sakura Wars. Really enjoying it so far.
Cool. Is that everything for you then, or anything else?
No, that's pretty much been it. I mean, I've been chiseling away at Snack World, but we've talked about Snack World so much on the show already. It's not even.
Yes. Oh, Snack World is wonderful. I love it. So, but yes, as you say, we've talked about it a lot so far. But I'm sure there'll be more to say in the future. Yes. Right. What have I been up to then? I have been playing Mana Khemia, but I'm going to talk a bit about that in our third segment, so I won't say much about that now because the battle system in that is part of what I want to talk about. Other stuff that I have been playing. Again, this is something we're probably going to talk about in an upcoming episode on 3D platformers. But I've been playing A Hat in Time recently, which my wife Andy got for my birthday. And I thought I'd check it out as a sort of game on the side to all the Atelier stuff that I've been doing recently. I've been absolutely loving it. It's a wonderful game. Game.
It really, really is.
Yeah. Switchport is a little bit dodgy. Like the sort of 2D backgrounds on the loading screens are really pixelated and the load times are massive. But once you start playing, it doesn't matter. It's one of those games where there's like a few technical issues and like you start playing and you see Hat Girl skipping around and all the wonderful animation she does and you just don't give a shit because it's such a lovely experience. But yeah, I've been super impressed with this. Like their intention with this was always to take the sort of best ideas of classic 3D platformers, particularly in the sort of Mario 64, Mario Sunshine style. So that means large, expansive levels that you can explore pretty openly. It means really varied objectives and a lot of personality to the main character without them actually saying anything. So yeah, I've been especially impressed by the fact that on no two levels in this game, I'm probably about maybe 2/3 of the way through the base game so far. On no two levels so far have I had to do the same thing. So like the first level that's on like Mafia Island, you have all sorts of different objectives to do, and that feels very much like a sort of Mario Sunshine level. It feels quite like the sort of Delfino Plaza area on Mario Sunshine. It's sort of a nice sunny place that's modelled after a small town and that sort of thing you can explore, and there's hidden things around the place, and that's all very nice. But then you go into the second stage, which is all based around movie sets, and like the first part of that you're exploring the actual sets themselves, but then for the rest of that chapter you're actually starring in the movies. So there's like a scene where you have to solve a murder on a train. There's a scene where you're running through a train that is exploding and you're trying to defuse a bomb on it. There's a scene where you're running around a sort of small but open cityscape trying to gather a fan club, and then there's regarded as one of the most irritating levels in the whole game is called the Big Parade, which is where you're in that same cityscape, but the entire floor of that place is covered by like your adoring fans, and you're leading a parade of musicians behind you who are constantly following the exact path you took. So if you stop, they will bump into you and hurt you. And so what happens is you effectively end up playing Snake on the rooftops of of this little city with this crowd of owls playing trombones behind you as you're leaping around trying to find these tokens and gems and stuff, while this wonderful sort of 1920s big band music is playing in the background. And it's just such a magical experience. I absolutely love it. Yeah, it's fantastic. And although it's inspired by sort of those older games that I've mentioned, they've obviously taken a lot of cues from some more modern stuff as well. Like there's a surprising amount of Final Fantasy XIV in here, for example.
Oh yeah,
yeah. Like a lot of the boss fights are very much designed in the way that they might be if Final Fantasy XIV was an actual action game. So you've got things like the visible telegraphs on the floor.
Sure.
You've got like being tethered to things and that meaning something, and sort of having visual cues that mean you have to do something specific. But yeah, there's a surprising amount of that in the game throughout, and sort of interpreting what all these various marks mean and figuring out exactly what to do. But it always feels really intuitive. There's been no situations where the game has had to sort of explicitly take you aside and say, look, no, this is what you need to do here. This is the button you need to press. This is the move you need to do here. It's all so intuitive. Like the whole game doesn't even start with a tutorial. It just throws you straight in. Occasionally gives you a button prompt on the screen to tell you how to do a specific move. But from that, the actual control scheme is so intuitive and enjoyable that you can just have so much pleasure from exploring those levels. It's great. I absolutely love it. And so when we come to talk about 3D platformers again in the near future, which will be an upcoming episode, don't know if it'll be the next one, but it will certainly be an upcoming episode. There's going to be a lot to talk about there for sure. You've played a little bit of this, haven't you? How far did you get?
Not super far. I just kind of beat the first level in its entirety. Like I did all the challenges in the first level. So okay. Like I have an idea of like what it is. But no, I haven't done like the second stage you're describing with the movie stuff yet.
Yeah.
Have you encountered the Yakuza yet? Because what's amazing about this game, right, is just the puns.
Yes.
The puns everywhere. So, like, there's a kind of a running theme in the game of, like, mafias, like, period. Yeah. Not just the mafia, but, like, varying cultural mafias.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
it is a race of people who are all called mafia.
Yeah.
And their name is mafia, and they're like, mafia do this. Mafia like to punch things in the face.
And, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but every planet you go to has, like, a different enemy group that's kind of a different mafia. So, like...
They show up around the places like the first chapter is the Mafia planet,
right?
But they sort of show up in other places. So like when you go to the third world, which is the sort of horror themed world, you'll see this occasional Mafia running around, but they're normally getting into some sort of situation that they really can't cope with, like they're being sucked into a possessed painting or something like that. But they tend to show up in most situations.
And like those Mafia guys are like weirdly based on the Russian Mafia, not like a traditional Italian Mafia like you'd think. It's very weird. But then in later levels, there's a Yakuza group, like a riff on the Yakuza, but they're cats. So they're the Nyakuza with an N, which nyan is like the Japanese like onomatopoeia for the sound a cat makes. Yeah. So like it's just the best pun. Like as soon as I found out about the Nyakuza, I was like, it only gets better. And like
there are so many gags in this game, and they always land as well, which is great. They've like really thought about how to make these jokes work and not feel super forced. It is genuinely funny.
This is something we were talking about kind of when you first started playing the game, but I think it's also important to talk about like the roots of this game. Mm-hmm. So like this game, Hat in Time, originated on the Something Awful forums.
Yeah.
Which was always like in the years before memes were even a thing. Like the Something Awful forums was this amazing repository for humor. Like always has been, like dark, sarcastic humor, but also kind of smart. So like if you're familiar at all with like the cadence and like kind of the atmosphere of the Something Awful forums, you can kind of get an understanding for like where like the sense of humor and like the cleverness like that veins throughout A Hat in Time comes from, because it was like born of this atmosphere.
Yeah. Yeah. But yeah, I am absolutely loving it so far. Like I say, I'm about two-thirds of the way through it so far. I've just unlocked the Death Wish difficulty level, which lets you go back to previous stages and do sort of new objectives that are a lot more difficult. And then once I finish the main game, there's also the Seal the Deal and the Nyakuza Metro stages that are added on as sort of separate things to play through as well. So I've got a fair way to go still yet, but I will definitely be writing about it when I'm done with it. And as I say, we'll be talking about it on a future episode of this podcast as well. So that's cool. What else have I been up to? I also finally made some time to play through Bloodstained Curse of the Moon, which is the 8-bit spin-off to Koji Igarashi's sort of reimagining of old-school Castlevania formulas. So this was the game that was made by Inti Creates that was originally going to be like a backer bonus, but they released it separately. And it's a loving homage to Castlevania 3 in particular.
It's so good.
It's fantastic, and I like it more than the old Castlevania games. I don't mind admitting it, because the old Castlevania games are good and they're super influential and they're still worth playing and so on. But what Curse of the Moon does is it takes all of the things that the Castlevania games sort of do okay, yeah, in a few circumstances, and it actually does them well.
Yeah.
So it takes all the things that sort of Konami were kind of sort of struggling a bit while they were still defining what this genre meant and what this type of game meant and so on. And Inti Creates have used the last 30 years of game design knowledge that they've picked up and that the industry in general has picked up to sort of polish off those rough edges and make something that's incredibly satisfying and enjoyable to play. And I think having had the context of playing through those earlier Castlevania games before I played this was really helpful, which is partly why I've held off actually playing this for so long. Mm-hmm. But now that I've played through, sort of definitely, well, not all the way through, but I have played the first 4 Castlevanias fairly substantially. I felt that I could go into this with a good understanding of what Castlevania meant and what this was supposed to be paying homage to. And yeah, I feel like I've really appreciated this game a lot more as a result. But yeah, it's got a lot of those things that Inti Creates specifically is very good at. Like the boss fights are a particular highlight of this. Yeah, they're all visually impressive, but sort of working within like the palette limitations of the NES. So the intention for this game was always what we talk about and describe as enhanced retro, which was the idea of taking what you would like to remember NES games looking like rather than what they actually look like. And so it's using the color palette of the NES, but then it's also adding lots more layers of parallax scrolling. It's running in widescreen. It's got massive sprites that the NES wouldn't have been capable of. It's not got sprite flicker or that weird sort of garbage that appears down the right hand side of the screen. Yeah, and so that means that sort of the boss encounters, it can bring in these huge enemies who have really distinct learnable attack patterns. And it's just a real pleasure to fight them, because they're all a puzzle to solve. They're all a pattern to spot, and they require you to sort of see an opening and take it. So that none of them are the sort of ones where you can just sort of go in there and hack and slash blindly. None of them are like, say, Castlevania's second boss, where you can just repeatedly drop holy water on the floor and kill it before it's even shot anything at you. But then I was surprised and impressed to discover quite how replayable this game is as well.
Oh, so sure.
There's lots of different ways that you can play this. So in the normal mode, you start as the character Zangetsu, and as you complete the first 4 stages, you meet various other characters from the Bloodstained series. So there's Miriam, who's the protagonist of Ritual of the Night. There is Alfred, who's an alchemist character who's also in Ritual of the Night. And then there's Jeeble, who is definitely not a vampire, but is the main antagonist of Ritual of the Night. And when you meet them, you have the option of talking to them to recruit them, which means you can then switch between them, Castlevania 3 style, or you can kill them. Which means that Zangetsu absorbs their powers and gets some sort of special ability like a double jump or an air attack or something like that. Or you can just ignore them, which means you just walk past them and you just carry on playing as just Zangetsu. And depending on what order you do that in, whether you save all of them, whether you kill them or that sort of thing, you unlock different game modes after that. So the one I unlocked because I recruited all of them on my first playthrough because I thought that was the only thing you could do the first time I played.
Yeah,
this.
I had no. This is all news to me. You're delivering because why would I ever choose not to recruit them?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know this until I looked it up afterwards. But yeah, I recruited them all first time through. And when you beat the game with that, you unlock what's called Nightmare Mode. And what happens in that is that you play through the game again, but you start without Zangetsu. So you've got Miriam and Alfred and Jeeble from the beginning, so you can make use of their various special abilities, which in turn allows you to reach secret areas you couldn't reach as just Zangetsu.
That makes sense.
But it also means you've only got 3 characters of sort of life bar to get through before you get killed. And all of the bosses have been beefed up quite considerably as well. So they all take a lot more damage and they all have more intense attack patterns. So you have to... Most of them don't require you to completely relearn the encounter. Most of them are just like if the boss throws things at you, for example, it'll throw more things at you. But in the case of like the third boss, which is like a fire-breathing dragon type thing, the timing on that is a lot more precise on Nightmare Mode. So it just makes it even more satisfying when you can actually pull that off, because the sort of window of opportunity is so tight in there. And then the entire last stage of Nightmare Mode is completely different, with a completely different final boss and so on. And then the opposite of that, if you kill everyone, is you then play on what's called Ultimate Mode, which is basically Nightmare Mode, but playing as just Zangetsu. So you have all the beefed up bosses and stuff like that, but you've only got this one character and his particular abilities to get through that as well. And then when you've done all that, there's a boss rush mode as well, where you have to get through all of the bosses in the game, the normal mode incarnations with just 1 life. So there's a surprising amount to do in this game. And like a single playthrough takes 2 hours. So there's like a pretty substantial amount of stuff to get through in this. I've been really impressed with it.
One of the things that I really love about this game, which is something I also was just kind of trying to talk about with Blasphemous, that this game does beautifully, is this kind of silent narrative through stage design.
Yes.
So, like, wordlessly, it tells like a pretty great story. I feel like the way the stages progress, which is exceptionally impressive because of like the 8-bit nature of the visuals. But like just using the example of like the first level, right? Like you start outside, like traditional Castlevania, then you make your way through this like haunted train station, like room by room. Then you finally make your way to the platform. Then there's a section where you're on the train, and then the final boss is the haunted engine of the train. Like just like that kind of transitional storytelling just through the backgrounds and like the way you make your way through the stage is really brilliantly done. And all the levels are that way.
Yeah, it's fantastic. It's absolutely fantastic. So, like I say, the sort of new final stage you get on Nightmare Mode is very good for this as well, because there's a bit where the 3 characters you're controlling, they split up and they each have to do their own specific thing to unlock a door to the final boss. That bit's really cool as well, and it's taking you through all sorts of really interesting designed areas and bosses and that sort of thing, and all sorts of interesting things you can interpret from that as well. So yeah, superb game, really, really cool on that. I know you're fairly lukewarm on Ritual of the Night so far, but because you played it when the Switch version first came out, and it wasn't particularly well optimized and that sort of thing.
I mean, it's not just that. Like, I just literally didn't think it was great. Like, it was. Not. Like, it wasn't really when I like my lukewarmness on Bloodstained really doesn't have much to do with the performance aspects of it at launch. It just more has to do with the fact that it's just not a great open world 2D platform. Like, the issue with it is that I have with it is. You know, obviously the Igavania games are amazing. Like all the Igavania games are amazing, but like I'm in the minority in that I think they were diminishing returns. A lot of people really liked the very last one on the DS. I didn't think it was very good at all. So I haven't really loved Igavania games since like the first one on the DS. I thought was like the peak of his work, and then I thought it was kind of downhill from there. And the issue with like Bloodstained for me was like obviously I was super excited about it, like backed it on Kickstarter immediately. But what had happened since the glory days of the Igavania on the Game Boy Advance and on the DS was since then the indie sphere has taken this genre and done stuff with it that is just above and beyond the Igavania stuff. So, like, like, I like Bloodstained. I think it's a competently made game, and it's perfectly great. It evokes the aesthetic that it's supposed to, and it's very good. But just like from a gameplay perspective, I've played so many open structure 2D platformers from the indie sphere historically. Stuff like Blasphemous, stuff like the Guacamelee games. Like the combat in the Guacamelee games is just so satisfying. Like the dimension shifting, the puzzles as part of the environments, like. The way the indie sphere has transformed and innovated within this genre has made Bloodstained feel very stagnant.
I see. Right.
It's just not a ton of fun to play because it's not doing anything super differently. And I know it's not Iga's fault, but like it just feels like a ripoff because it's like it's not Castlevania, but it is Castlevania. Yeah. It's like super trying to have the spirit of Castlevania, but because it's not Castlevania, it doesn't quite feel right. And it's just, there's a lot about it that's great and worth celebrating, and I'm glad it exists, and it's a good game, but I just didn't fall in love with it the way I wanted to, because as I was playing it, I was like, oh, well, there's been more exciting games in this genre in the past 10 years. Yeah. So that's why I don't love Bloodstained. I like Bloodstained. I don't hate it. I'm not going to rip on it, but it's not as satisfying now because we've seen better.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, well, anyway, I've just started playing through Ritual of the Night now, so I'll have more to say on that in the near future. But I've enjoyed what I've played so far. I don't think I've played anywhere near as many of these games as you have, so I'm probably coming to this with a slightly different perspective to you, and that may be why I'm sort of responding fairly positively to it so far. But
I mean, it's good. Don't take what I just said as me saying this is a bad game. Do not play
absolutely.
It. It's an exceptionally well-made, competent, and enjoyable version of what it is. It's just not as exciting as I've come to expect after years of innovation in the genre.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But anyway, I'll have more to say on that in the near future. So
they just added the Zangetsu mode too. I think they just patched that in like a week ago.
Yes, they've patched it into the to the PS4 and PC versions, and I think the Switch version is coming like next week or something. And it's got the randomizer mode in there as well, so you can play it through and with sort of various randomizations of enemies and item placement and quests and that sort of thing as well. So that's going to add some interesting replay value. I've got a few streamer friends who've been quite excited about returning to it with that mode on. Yeah, randomizers are super popular with like streaming and Let's Players. So
yeah. Isn't Zangetsu voice acted by David Hayter or like someone who's popular?
Yes, it's David Hayter. Like I just got to the first Zangetsu boss fight.
That's a good fight.
It's a super difficult fight. I wasn't ready for that at all. I was like, whoa! I'd like sailed through the beginning of the game. Like, this is fine, and then he absolutely decimated my ass repeatedly.
That was the first big challenge in that game.
Yeah,
that's one of my problems with that game is that the boss fights are wildly uneven.
Yes.
Like some of the boss fights in that game are exceedingly well designed, like the Zangetsu fight, like challenging, great patterns, but then some of them you can just cheese your way through without even having to dodge anything. And it's just like it's not even.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, if you look back at Symphony of the Night, there's a few bosses in that you can cheese in that way as well.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
So he's just being authentic to his roots.
Yeah, oh, there you go.
Anyway, that's pretty much everything I want to talk about in this segment now. Like I say, I'll talk a bit about Khemia in the next section because my main focus on the battle systems we're going to talk about today is going to be the Atelier Iris games because that's what I've been immersing myself in recently. So we'll take a short break now and we'll return and we will talk about those battle systems in just a moment. So we'll see you then. Welcome back. For our third segment, we decided it would be nice to return to a favourite topic of both of us, which is RPG battle systems. So we want to talk about some of our favourites, or some of the ones we found most interesting, or ones that have kind of struck us as sort of influential over the years, all that sort of thing. So they're not necessarily the best ones, but ones that we just want to talk about for one reason or another. So hopefully we won't go over any of the ground that we've done before. I've actually got the old episode open in front of us here, so I don't repeat myself. But yeah, so, where would you like to begin?
Well, I think I would like to start with one of the systems that as soon as we were done recording the first episode on this topic, I immediately banged my head on the desk and was like, how did I get through a whole episode about RPG mechanics and not mention this game? So I want to talk about Valkyrie Profile.
All right, yes.
Or what is commonly referred to as a formation battle system.
Okay.
So, Valkyrie Profile is an RPG by Tri-Ace. Tri-Ace will come up frequently when we talk about interesting RPGs, because Tri-Ace has ever been an experimental RPG house, always looking to kind of innovate with mechanics and design. That's always been their MO.
Yeah.
Valkyrie Profile is after Star Ocean, which is their most famous series, perhaps their second most famous series. And the whole idea of Valkyrie Profile was that the dungeons in Valkyrie Profile are side-scrolling action games, and then when you attack an enemy, you transition to a traditional battle sequence.
Yeah.
The way the battle sequences are set up in Valkyrie Profile is basically all mapped to the original PlayStation controller with the diamond arrangement of buttons that the original PlayStation popularized.
Yeah.
You have a party of 4 characters. Each character is mapped to one button. So one character is on triangle, one character is on X, one on circle, one on square. Now, unlike a traditional turn-based battle system, there is a menu you can pull up, but you have to pull it up specifically. Like the menu doesn't come up when it's time to act.
Right.
Characters are simply mapped to those buttons. So if you press the button that the character is mapped to in the formation that you set up in the menu, that character will simply execute their physical attack.
Yeah.
Really, really simple. Where the complexity comes in is that every character in the game, of which there are many to recruit, have a different attack. So the guy, like one of the main characters who's important to the narrative, has like a giant, like Final Fantasy VII style, like sword that's bigger than him, right? So his deal is a huge lumbering swing that does massive damage, but takes a long time to wind up. But you can get an archer who just stands in the back and fires a volley of arrows. You get a magician who casts a spell that makes fire erupt underneath the enemies, which does an air launch. So really what this game wants you to do is take some of the lessons you've hopefully learned in your life through playing fighting games about hitboxes, timing, and distance, and build this formation and your character party around the idea that you want to create instances of hit stun and do juggles to the enemies.
Yeah.
And you want to execute each character's attack based on your knowledge of their timing in order to create these opportunities where you just juggle the shit out of the enemies to do bonus damage. So like you want to erupt using like the character examples I provided, right? Perhaps you want to lead in with the main character, use her strike, then use the magician girl to erupt, launch the enemy into the air. While the guy is in the air, you use the archer guy to hit the enemy with a volley of arrows while they're in the air. While that archer guy is unleashing his arrows, you trigger the big sword guy to come in, cue up his swing, so that as soon as the enemy drops, his massive swing hits the enemy like home run style.
Awesome.
Like, and that's Valkyrie Profile. Like collecting these different characters with these different timing and attack styles, and then experimenting with these formations for how to create interesting attack combos. Enemies can be overkilled. So, like, when an enemy is stunned or launched, you do bonus damage to them. And the notion is to hit an enemy way past their original health. I think you said this was something that happened in Blue Reflection as well.
Omega Quintet, you think?
Oh, yeah, Omega Quintet, yeah.
Omega Quintet has like... you have like a visible hit point bar for every enemy in Omega Quintet, and once you empty it, it starts filling back up again, and you have to try and basically overkill the enemy by the amount of their original hit points for significant bonuses.
Yeah, yep. So it's the same in Valkyrie Profile, and the more of this damage you do, obviously the greater experience or money you get, the potentiality for item drops is higher. So it's just a pleasure to play, and Valkyrie Profile is one of those games where everything is just holistically designed in a beautiful way. So the voice acting is very good. Even the English voice acting is quite legendary in this game for its cheesiness, but it's like pleasant cheesiness. The soundtrack is classic, like strange, discordant, like Motoi Sakuraba work, like very, very medieval in tone, but also with like hints of electronic in it. So it's like very unique. And just everything comes together to make this game where you just want to be in combat constantly. It's so satisfying to do these combos, to execute these air juggles. The music is playing, it's incredible. The victory music is amazing. You just want to do it over and over and over again, and every character you recruit has a different attack style, so like you want to return back to dungeons to experiment with them, and it just gets better and better. And like I mentioned, it's very inspired by fighting games and combat-focused side-scrollers. So it was interesting from a design perspective to play this for the first time and come to the realization that they were trying to fuse these more action-focused side-scrolling games with an RPG, and it just felt so right. Then there's 3 proper games in the Valkyrie Profile series, right? So there's the original Valkyrie Profile. There's Valkyrie Profile, which is on the PS1 and then ported in an enhanced version to the PSP. There's Valkyrie Profile 2, which is on the PS2, and that was really interesting because what it did was it expanded on that combat. So in the original Valkyrie Profile, you had side-scrolling dungeons. When you hit an enemy, you transitioned to a battle sequence where you would fight your party versus the enemy party. What we call symbol encounters, right? Like every enemy on the screen was indicative of like a party of enemies. Valkyrie Profile 2 took everything from the original and then expanded upon that greatly. So you have the side-scrolling dungeons again, but then when you make contact with the enemy, what ends up happening is you get transported to the battle sequence. The battle sequence isn't just an immediate side-scrolling, like a side-on presented battle sequence, like a traditional Final Fantasy, which is how Valkyrie Profile was. What it takes you to is a massive field where your party can run around, almost like Dynasty Warriors style. And then when you encounter the enemies on that field, or they encounter you, then the dynamic shifts, and then you fight that enemy with the traditional Valkyrie Profile system. So it adds a distinct action and space management element on top of that layer. So it's really, really great. Then the third Valkyrie Profile game is Covenant of the Plume for the DS. And that changes things up again by being like a Tactics Ogre style, turn-based, grid-based strategy RPG. And then when you attack enemies on that strategy grid, it transitions to a traditional Valkyrie Profile battle system. So they traditionally, in traditional Tri-Ace fashion, what they have done is take this amazing core they've built and then continue to experiment with it in new ways across the series. So you can see why people are always like, new Valkyrie Profile when? Because it's just wonderful. And to that degree, from a fan perspective, like this battle system is much beloved, right? To the point where there's so many games that are stylized after this. So Tri-Ace themselves made a game called Exist Archive, which is the same style battle system outside of the Valkyrie Profile universe. It's a whole new game. But then there have been games in the indie sphere that have also aped this. So the most famous of which is Indivisible by the creators of Skullgirls, which is beat for beat essentially the original Valkyrie Profile. Side-scroller dungeons, multiple characters with different attacks to collect and build these formation parties. It's very similar in design, just lovingly recreated in its own world, as well as that Neptunia spin-off.
Yes.
Super Neptunia RPG was also designed in a way as to be a tribute to Valkyrie Profile. So this is just a very, very well thought of battle system. Like historically, people always think about it fondly.
Yeah, cool. It's not a series I have any experience with at all at the moment, but
I think you'd love it a lot.
Yeah, I have a feeling I would. I mean, I have Super Neptunia RPG on my shelf, and I have Valkyrie Profile 2, I think, on PS2. But that's as far as I've got so far. Is owning those two games. So.
Oh yeah, you really should get the PSP version of the original. It's quite wonderful. Because I mean, I don't know what you know about the game from like a narrative standpoint either, but like how much you know about Norse mythology.
It's sort of all to do with like isn't it like sort of related to the afterlife and stuff and sort of
yeah. So like not to become like mythology like professor, but like the whole like crux of most Norse mythology is the notion that the world is going to end, right? There's going to be Ragnarok, a giant battle of like the gods versus the underworld, and the whole notion of like morality and like honor in the Norse folklore is the idea that like if you are an honorable enough warrior, like you should die on the battlefield, and if you die on the battlefield, a Valkyrie will descend, and a Valkyrie will recruit you to become what is called an Einherjar, which is a soldier in Heaven's army, essentially, right? So in Valkyrie Profile, you play as a Valkyrie, and the parts that are not dungeons, you are scouring the world for souls who are on the verge of death.
Yeah.
And you observe the end moments of their life, understand like the tragedy of their death, then you come to them and recruit them to be an Einherjar.
Yeah.
And the idea is that you are collecting the Einherjar and training them to be the force that will help you win in the final battle against Hell's forces.
Yeah.
So it's really like it's a very tragic and somber game because each new character you create is like an episodic structure where you learn about the tragic circumstances of their death. It's wonderful. It's very, very beautiful. It's a very beautiful exploration of like life, death, tragedy, and kind of redemption through honor.
Yeah, sounds great. Sounds very, very much the sort of thing I enjoy. So I will have to make time for that at some point.
I would recommend it.
All right, where are we going next then?
I thought Bravely Default was worth bringing up.
Yeah, sure.
I really like Bravely Default's system. I really enjoy battle systems that take an approach where there's kind of a gamble element, if that makes sense. An approach where like you as the player are required to make choices. Now that's kind of stupid because you have to always make choices in a traditional battle system. It's all about making choices. But what I'm specifically thinking of is make choices, high risk choices, where you can really, the outcome of the battle can hinge on this choice you make, the single choice you make, right? You can make a huge gamble that can be like do or die.
Yeah.
And Bravely Default kind of epitomized that for me with what they call the Brave and Default system. So Bravely Default, which is one of my favorite games of all time, period, has a system where you can default, which essentially means you block. When you do this, you build up points, and I believe it was up to 4 points, 4 or 5 points. I don't remember.
Yeah.
So you build up this reservoir of points by blocking. Of course, the notion here is you're making a distinct choice not to attack the enemy, to not do damage, to prolong the battle by blocking and protecting yourself to build this point. When you have those points, you can make the choice to brave. When you brave, you may spend those points to act multiple times in one turn.
Yes.
So essentially what it's doing is flipping the entire notion of the traditional RPG battle system on its head by allowing you to execute multiple actions in a single turn. Mm-hmm. So the opportunities for strategy that opens up are of course massive. Take for instance, you've got a white mage in your party, and you're fighting a particularly challenging boss who does like a wave attack that does a huge amount of damage to every character in your party. You might choose to have your white mage default and block to build points every turn, just never attack.
Yeah.
And then after that wave attack, she's got 4 points built up, so she can heal every single character in the party in one turn and bring them all back to max health. So these are the kind of strategies that it opens you up for. Perhaps you're fighting an enemy who has a shield that you have to bring down in order to damage them, but every turn they refresh that shield if you don't... every turn they refresh that shield, even if you bring it down. Well, then the strategy here is to take your character who has the shield breaking ability, have them block for 4 turns, then have them attack 4 times in the turn once they have enough points. Their first attack is the shield break, and then 3 of their most devastating hits to get in before that shield's restored. It really forces you to think about timing and the structure of turns in a way that games hadn't done prior. Mm-hmm. So that's one of my very favorites, and I have super fond memories of just these amazing strategies paying off. Where just like I did a 4 times brave and I did like massive damage and like took an enemy out in like 1 turn with like all 3 characters. Like it's super satisfying to like build a strategy and think long game in your head in a way that traditionally like games like of the Final Fantasy mold don't really promote long game thinking. It's more of like a turn to turn survival kind of thinking.
Yeah.
But
I'd agree with that.
Yeah, so like Bravely Default has like a very future sight focused approach to how to strategize combat, and it was the first RPG I really can think of that made me do that wasn't a strategy game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you can probably tie that to... that's probably sort of related to battle systems that allow you to influence or affect the turn order in various ways as well.
Yes, yeah, like Grandia and whatnot.
Yeah, well, I mean, Grandia's like an example that sort of uses its time gauge and so on. But I'm also thinking of stuff like Final Fantasy X was the first time I saw this.
Oh, sure.
Final Fantasy X is not my favourite battle system by any means, but it's the first time I saw a combat system where you could do certain actions and that would affect what was coming next. So like you could perform certain actions and that would knock an enemy back in the turn order and so on. I haven't revisited Final Fantasy X for a long time, but my initial reaction to that was that it was cool, but it didn't feel like you could do that particularly often in that game. Mm-hmm. This sort of brings me on to the main games that I want to talk about today, which are the 3 Atelier Iris games and Mana Khemia. They're all from Gust. And I want to talk about all of these because they're all a bit different from each other. This was obviously a very sort of experimental period for Gust. But the way they were experimenting it made them come out with four games that played quite differently. The ones with the most similarities are Atelier Iris 3 and Mana Khemia, which are both built on the same sort of core system, whereas Iris 1 and 2 are both on almost completely different systems. But there's an obvious sort of evolutionary process that has gone on between them. So to describe each of those in turn then. So the first Atelier Iris game is a fairly conventional seeming turn-based system. So, like, people act according to their speed stat and sort of invisible initiative rolls and so on. And so, like, someone gets their turn, they have the choice to do something. But the slight twist that it provided on that formula was the fact that not every action you do is instant. So there were 2 ways that it implemented this. One was you would trigger an action that takes more than... that doesn't activate immediately, and your character would have to sort of stand still and do something like chant a spell or something like that. And the other implementation was that the action would cause the character to leave the screen while they were preparing for this attack. So sort of the two good examples of this from Atelier Iris Eternal Mana were the character Norn has a spell called Turn to Candy, which is basically an instant death spell for a lot of enemies, where she has to spend quite a long time chanting this spell, but if she gets it off, in most cases she can immediately murder an enemy and turn them into some sort of sweet treat. So it's both horrifying and super cute at the same time.
Turn to Candy!
But yeah, she is very vulnerable while she's casting that because she can't do anything else. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got the character Lita, who has an ability where she disappears to go and find a rock to throw at the enemy, like a really big rock, not just like a pebble on the ground or something, like a lump of cliff, basically. And when you tell her to do that, she leaves the screen. So she is completely invulnerable to all attacks while she's doing that as well. So that means you can tactically make use of that move, not just to do damage, because it's a very powerful move that can often interrupt enemy attacks, but also to keep her out of harm's way as well. So if you know a big attack is coming from the enemy, if you've seen an enemy starting off chanting one of their moves that's going to take several turns for them to get off, you can send Lita off to go and fetch this rock. And by the time she comes back, either the enemy's move will have gone off, or she'll be able to let off this attack, which will interrupt the enemy's attack in the process. So that side of things, it was a sort of really interesting to me in that it was sort of influencing the turn order, but in a slightly different way to how I'd seen it implemented before, and I like that a lot. And there's quite a few things I like about Eternal Mana's battle system. One of which is sort of the implementation of alchemy into it. So, as most people listening know, the Atelier series is very much based around the idea of alchemy and making items and so on. The Atelier Iris games are kind of slightly less focused on the crafting side of things than some of the later and the earlier games, but there's still a significant component to it. So you can handle alchemy items in two ways in battle in Eternal Mana. So you can either have prepared a bunch of them beforehand in your workshop, which means that you've got them on hand and you can then use the protagonist's various skills to affect either how powerful they are or the area of effect that they have. Or if you have run out of items during battle, you can get him to use mana energy to actually craft them mid-battle. But if you do that, they only ever have their base effect. They never have the wider area of effect or the increased power or anything like that. So you can use that to get yourself out of a pinch in the middle of combat, but ideally what you want to do is sort of prepare yourself well beforehand and have lots of these items ready to go so that you can beef them up or make them do larger explosions and that sort of thing. So that was a really interesting way that sort of a core aspect of the series was incorporated into the mechanics of the game outside of its usual context. So a lot of later Atelier games in particular, they just have the protagonist is just distinguished as themselves by them being the only one who can use items. But in this one, anyone can use items, but the protagonist is the only one who can actually craft items in mid-combat or affect the sort of effectiveness of all these items while he's fighting as well. So that was very interesting to me.
Yeah, I really remember enjoying that whole aspect of like being able to craft in battle. I thought was really interesting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, definitely. Then we move on to Atelier Iris 2, which has some similarities, but then also a lot of differences as well. So you still have this option to craft stuff in mid-battle if you want to. But the twist here is that the main male protagonist that you're controlling for most of the game, he's not a particularly good alchemist at anything other than using mana energy to just duplicate these items. So he doesn't have access to these skills that can affect the power and the range of them like Klein does in Eternal Mana. Towards the end of the game, the female protagonist, who is the sort of good alchemist of the pair of them, she joins your party, and then you have access to a lot of these same abilities that you do. And there's a very sort of Final Fantasy IX style learning skills from weapons system in that game. So like while you have a particular weapon equipped, you can make use of the skill that's attached to that weapon, and if you fight enough battles with that weapon equipped, you then permanently learn that skill and so on. So you have to sort of build up this arsenal of skills until you're sort of in a position where you can make use of any of them at will. So that was sort of the one similarity between the first two Atelier Iris games. Aside from that, there were a lot of things that were quite different about it. The main one being that it made use of a sort of vaguely grandiose style time gauge at the top of the screen. So rather than unfolding in strict sort of initiative order, turn-based like Eternal Mana did, Atelier Iris 2 was sort of quasi-real time. So you had these icons that were sliding across this bar at the top of the screen, some for your party, some for the enemies. And when they reach the right-hand side, it's that person's turn to act. Now, you have two types of basic attack in Atelier Iris 2. So you have a charge attack, which does sort of a normal amount of damage, and it increases a skill meter in the corner of the screen, which is shared between all of your party members, and is then used to unleash various spells and special attacks and so on. Or you can do what's called a break attack, which... its main function is it doesn't build the skill meter, but it does knock the enemy back on the time gauge.
This is pure Grandia.
Yeah, exactly.
This is 100%.
Yeah, exactly. The thing with that is if you do it too often, it becomes less effective each time you do it in succession, so you can't just repeatedly knock an enemy back and ensure that they never have a turn. You have to sort of use it fairly tactically. And the reason that you might want to do that is this system in the game called chaining, which is where if you knock an enemy far enough back on the time bar into a specially marked part on the left-hand side of it, the enemy enters what's called break status, which means that they're sort of stunned, and it also opens a chain. So any hits that you land while an enemy is in this break status, while at least one enemy is in this break status, it adds to a chain, and it tots up how many hits you do, it tots up how much damage you do in this chain, and the higher that is by the time you finish the battle, the more experience points and the more skill points you get. So it's possible to rack up some huge combos if you attack enemies in the right order, and when they are in this break state, you make sure that you use your special attacks that hit the highest number of times and that sort of thing. So there's some sort of really interesting tactical considerations there. This was then built on somewhat in Atelier Iris 3, which again changed the way that turn order was implemented into a system that kind of stayed in place for quite a few subsequent games. So it definitely stayed in place for Khemia. Don't know about Khemia 2 because I haven't played it yet, but it's also definitely present in Atelier Rorana to Atelier Meruru to various degrees as well, which is where that you and your enemies are represented as a line of cards across the top of the screen, and every sort of turn, a card moves from the right-hand side of the stack to the left-hand side. They gradually cycle round like that. And when someone's card reaches the right-hand edge of it, it's their turn to do something. So, and what happens then is that the action they do determines how far back down the stack they get pushed. So different attacks have different amounts of time that they take. So a more powerful attack will push your card further to the left in the stack, making it longer before they can act again. But again, there are various ways that you can affect the turn order in that. There's quite a strong focus on equipment in Atelier Iris 3. So you can attach various traits to it that affects like the delay rates, they call it. So the higher your delay rate is, the more likely you are to just knock an enemy back with just a regular attack. And then a lot of your skills as well have the knockback ability as well, which will knock them back in time to various degrees as well. So again, it's a case of learning the effects that your basic attacks and your skills do, optimizing your equipment in such a way that you can manipulate the turn order to your advantage, and then sort of try and make it as much as possible that you can deal as much damage as you can without the enemy getting a turn, if at all possible. And this ties in with something that we mentioned last time I talked about Atelier Iris 3, which is Burst. so Burst,
edgy.
Burst is a system that's kind of related to the chain system I talked about in Atelier Iris 2, which is all to do with like hit count and that sort of thing. So what happens in Atelier Iris 3 is every hit you do adds to this meter at the bottom of the screen. And so what that means is a lot of your basic attacks do multiple hits now as well. So certain weapons will hit more times but do less damage with each hit. Certain items will hit lots of times. So certain other items will do lots of damage. And when you fill this burst meter, what happens is you start a chain like you do in Atelier Iris 2. So you can try and rack that up as much as possible. And that gives you bonus experience and skill points and stuff after the battle. But what also happens when that chain is open and the burst is happening is that your normal attacks stay the same strength, but all of your special attacks are like 10 times stronger or something ridiculous like that. So
10.
That is a great way of absolutely mashing bosses. So there are items that you can make that are sort of specifically designed for racking up as many hits as possible to increase the burst meter, but they do hardly any damage, for example. So a good way of defeating some of the bosses later in the game is to chuck out a few of these items to get a burst out as quickly as possible, and then unleash your most powerful skills to do ridiculous amounts of damage. And that was a sort of a really interesting approach to battle strategy, because a lot of the bosses have clearly been designed with that in mind. Sure. Like they have seemingly astronomical hit point counts, but as soon as you start attacking them with burst-powered special abilities and so on, you start making a much more obvious dent in them. Whereas if you just stick to normal attacks and so on, you'll feel like you're never going to beat them. So that was really interesting. Khemia, like I say, makes use of what appears to be exactly the same battle system as Atelier Iris 3 when you first start playing it, but as you progress, it starts to kind of distinguish itself a bit more. It's still got the burst system, but it's a little bit less generous in terms of how that meter builds up. What you need to do in Khemia very much is focus on enemy weaknesses. So like if you just do a normal hit in Khemia, you'll hardly add anything to the burst meter. But if you hit an enemy's elemental weakness, you'll add a huge amount to that meter in one go. So hitting an enemy like 2 or 3 times with what they're weak against will get you a burst. And in that case, it ups the power of everything you do, but not quite as much as it did in Atelier Iris 3. So it's a sort of a subtle difference there. The main difference that Khemia has got, though, is that it's got this, although it's mostly a turn-based system, it's also got this sort of real-time reaction-based system as well, where you have 3 characters in your front line at any time, and you have 3 characters in your back line who aren't actively participating in combat. But when you do an attack in Khemia, if one of your backline characters is fully charged up and you press a button in the right timing, you can then call them in to swap with your frontline character, and they will get a free attack at that point. And if all 3 characters in your backline are charged up, you can basically cycle around all 3 characters and hit an enemy 4 or 5 times in a single turn. So that's kind of a twist on what you were talking about with Bravely Default there, which is sort of turning the standard turn-based structure on its head by allowing you to do multiple things in a single turn that you wouldn't normally be able to do. And that, for me, so far, I haven't finished Khemia yet, but that's sort of a real sort of standout feature for me, because it gives kind of an element of dynamism and excitingness to these battles that sort of a straight turn-based system not necessarily lacks, but it sort of gives a nice balance between the sort of strategy of turn-based menu-driven combat and a slight action feel to it as well. It's really satisfying when it works.
Yeah, that's one thing I've always found interesting about like a really well executed like traditional turn-based RPG battle system is when I talk to people who like video games but aren't specifically interested in RPGs the way we are, one of the things that's really difficult to explain about like RPG battle sequences is the way they use choices and statistics to replicate the dynamism and motion of battle. Yes. into a turn-based structure. So it's an abstraction of combat. Yes. Where numbers are king. But it's interesting when games do kind of what you're talking about, which is continue to use the idea of turns and numbers and timing in the abstract sense to replicate the way movement might work on a field of battle. Like that's fascinating to me. Yeah.
The other thing I find quite fascinating about Atelier Iris 3 specifically is that sort of the way all this is presented has a big effect on how it feels as well. So like Atelier Iris 3, the way that its interface is designed and the way that it uses sound effects and the way that the camera moves around and the sort of over-the-top special effects and so on, it feels like a fighting game. Like you're picking things from a menu, but it feels like a fighting game. You're building up this meter and you're unleashing special attacks, and like the background goes all swirly when you're in a burst and that sort of thing. And it's the same kind of buzz you get out of like something cool happening in a fighting game, but you're picking stuff from a menu, and it's all to do with how that's presented. And the Atelier Iris 3 in particular is really good at that.
Yeah, and like it just sounds like that dynamic back and forth.
Yeah,
it really like also plays into the fighting game feel. It's really the same with like I was talking about Valkyrie profile, because everything you can do, the enemies can do, right? Like the enemies can juggle you in the same way, so it's all about that back and forth and the kind of the thrill of the fight in terms of the dynamic motion and the trade-offs.
Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, I admittedly, we've talked about the Mana games a lot in the past couple weeks since you've been making your way through them, but like I haven't played the Iris series in the PS2 probably since their launch, so like I'm really due for a refresher as well. I really love PS2 era Gust.
Yeah, definitely. What I mean, I wrote about this on my Patreon blog yesterday, but I think it's worth mentioning here as well. I found it kind of weirdly fascinating and a bit disappointing to return to reviews from when these games first came out, because my god, did they miss the point.
Well, people they didn't play the games. They played the first hour and a half at most, and then decided they knew everything the game could offer, and then
yeah I've seen so many reviews that talk about the 3 Atelier Iris games as each of them being more of the same, and they could not be more different from each other in terms of feel. They are all very, very different from one another. They're mechanically unique. They are quite different tonally in many cases. They have a very different focus in terms of narrative. And it's just weird to see like a review from sites that I respect, like spending 500 words talking about a 40-hour game and saying, oh, this is just another RPG. It's just like all the other ones that I've played. It's got generic anime-style characters and... and it just sort of really drives home to me that how much better a lot of people are about talking about games these days.
Sure.
I'm not just sort of blowing our own trumpet here, but like generally speaking, just the way that gaming has evolved over the years has meant that people are much more conscious of things like mechanics and narrative design and tone and all that sort of thing, and it's really a sign of how much talking and thinking about games has matured over the years. And it kind of gives the impression that in some ways a lot of these games are very much ahead of their time, because it's obvious that there was an audience for them, because there's numerous sequels to Atelier Iris and MoeGamer, and the Atelier series carried on, so there was obviously an audience there. But in terms of like professional criticism and commentary and so on, yeah, these games were ahead of their time, and like the supposed professionals who were commentating on these things, they weren't ready for them. They did not know how to talk about them. Yeah. Bizarre. Absolutely bizarre.
Well, I mean, games, it's a whole nother topic to talk about the evolution of like games writing from like hobbyist to hobbyism to professionalism to kind of a goofy fucking boys club of like people who just knew each other to like an actual profession where like people with like writing education, like the way that entire field had evolved over the past couple decades is pretty amazing to trace. Very, very, very interesting. But yeah, these games couldn't be more mechanically rich if they tried, and they certainly weren't given the justice that they deserved when they launched.
Yeah, as I've said a few times in various things that I've written, I think a lot of the problem with these games is that they came out in like 2007 to 2009. The Xbox 360 came out in 2005.
Sure.
So we were 2 years after gaming had entered quote unquote the HD generation.
Yeah.
And so for an isometric perspective RPG with sprite-based characters to come along, while everyone was sort of drooling all over, I don't know, Halo or Gears of War or whatever at the time.
Yeah. Totally different. And like I know, one of the things I always think back to is our friendship. Like we became friends because of our mutual love of Art Tonelico.
Yes.
And just thinking about how like people did not have the equipment to discuss Artonelico when it came out. Like, this is an RPG, but it's also a visual novel, and the choices you make from a narrative perspective also affect the dynamics of combat and the story. Like, people had no idea how to contextualize something like Artonelico and like at the time.
Yeah.
Like the reviews of that are like painful.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, the nice thing about all these games is like they're still reasonably readily accessible these days, and because we are all better equipped to look at and analyze and talk about these games now, we can now appreciate them for what they are, which is great. And I mean, that's what we've been doing today. I think everything we've mentioned so far today has been sort of PS1, PS2 era, hasn't it? So
yeah. I mean, I talked about Bravely Default. That's on the 3DS. I've got a couple newer games I want to mention, but most of the stuff I'm talking about today is older.
Yeah.
I think the newest game I really want to mention in depth today is Resonance of Fate.
Oh, and yes.
But really, like, the next game on my list is Guardians Crusade, and that's a PS1 game.
Yeah.
You ever played Guardians Crusade? Are you familiar with Guardians Crusade?
My sole experience with this is I remember seeing an advert for this and thinking, oh, that looks quite interesting, and then nothing. I'm not entirely sure it came out over here, so I might have missed the boat on that one. But yeah, let's hear it then.
So Guardians Crusade's by Tamsoft, which is cool.
Yes.
So we know, like, Tamsoft now is known because of Senran Kagura.
Yeah.
Right? And their involvement with Senran Kagura and the Action Neptunia titles. But they've been around forever. So Guardians Crusade is their turn-based RPG for the PS1. And what's really interesting about Guardians Crusade, which is something I don't think I've ever encountered in another game, is that you only have one character in battle.
Yeah.
It's a turn-based RPG. You only have one character in battle. This knight, this kind of generic knight that's supposed to be your like player insert. He's pretty much mute throughout the game. And then you have like the little monster baby that you are like in charge of taking care of. And the little monster baby, it's like there's like a virtual pet aspect, right? Like the way you treat it, what you feed it, and how you raise it has a direct effect on the way the baby acts in combat. So like the baby is there aside of you in combat, but it is AI controlled, and that's entirely dictated by like your actions and like how you raise it and how you take care of it. But like there's only one character in battle that you control, and that's your little self-insert knight. Everything else is dictated by the AI and how this baby acts. And like sometimes the baby just takes a nap for the whole battle. Like you have no control over it. Sometimes the baby just eats one of your items. It's really weird. And like when I was younger and this first came out, like I was just in like this fury where I would like buy every RPG, like without vetting it, without renting it, without reading about it. It's like I hated this game so much because like I couldn't control it. I didn't understand it. It's actually like, despite its cuteness, like balls hard. Yeah, like a really challenging game. But as an adult looking back on it, man, it had a really interesting battle system with only one controllable character. All the magic in it are these summons you have to find throughout the world, quote, living toys, unquote, and they have different ways they act. So, like, there are some that you summon, and they also become AI party teammates for that battle. There are some that are just one-shot spells that just happen, and then there are others that are, like, big, powerful summons that you can only use once per battle. So, like, there's all kinds of, like, different rules that dictate, like, how you can use these living toys and, like, what they do. Yeah. So some of them allow you to create a third party member for yourself, who is probably a lot more reliable than that stupid baby monster. But yeah, it's just a really unique game that, like, challenges you with, making choices as the single playable character in a turn-based combat scenario. When I play a RPG, like, typically I'm like, the beginning parts, it's like, oh, I can't wait to get the next party member. So like the mechanics expand and change. But like in Guardians Crusade, that doesn't happen. You have to learn how to own this shit with just one person that you can control. And it's very different. Like I've never played anything like it.
Yeah, that sounds really cool. It's sort of getting kind of vibes of, I've mentioned this a few times before, but Criminal Girls on that as well.
Yes, yeah, that's something I wanted to mention later too.
Yeah, so Criminal Girls is a game where your protagonist does not participate in combat. They are supposed to be rehabilitating these girls as they travel through purgatory. And the whole thing, the whole nature of the story and the mechanics is all built on the idea of trust. So at the beginning of the game, none of these girls will do anything that you tell them to. Like every turn you have in battle in Criminal Girls, you choose between suggestions that all four of the girls give, and you pick one of them to do whatever they suggested. And at the beginning of the game, all of them are just saying, "No, I'm not going to do anything. Fuck you," basically. And you have to sort of build up your trust with them, and you can't specifically tell them what to do, but as you progress through the game and as you get to know them a bit better, and as you use the other mechanics to build up your level of trust with them, you start to feel like you have more control over what's going on, even though all you are doing, they are still sort of thinking for themselves and giving their own suggestions. So yeah, I get quite a strong vibe of that from what you're talking about there, from a kind of different perspective.
Sure. And like I had actually, besides listing like specific games I wanted to talk about in more depth, I had just kind of put a mini list together of specific mechanics that are kind of across a wide variety of games that I really appreciate or find interesting. And one of those mechanics I had listed as interesting is games where you don't really control the combat itself, but you more like direct the action, and the characters act based on their own AI protocols, their stats, or like how you've developed them. Yeah. So like I had listed Criminal Girls, obviously, as one of those titles. Also the more recently Hero Land. Hero Land also works like that. Or Crosswork, I think it was called in Japan. And the whole idea of Hero Land is you're an employee of this amusement park that like people are going on an adventure through, and you are their like guide through these dungeons. And so every character acts based on AI and their personalities and stats, and you as their guide can issue kind of vague commands and like kind of direct how you hope the battle will go. And then like there's a bar that builds up as the combat progresses, and like you can issue direct commands like once to one character when that bar fills up to like really control the action. But like otherwise you're just like saying like, I want you to defend, I want you to attack, let's see how this plays out. It's more like a simulation than it is like a directly controlled battle sequence. So like I find games that take this approach pretty interesting, where you are not directly participating in the battle. Yeah. It's not something I love, because like specifically one of the reasons I love video games is it's a realm where I can control everything. But it is interesting to see how games kind of play with this idea that you may want to function as more of a director than a participant. Yeah. So I don't know too many games off the top of my head. I mean, I guess one could argue games like the Tales of games and the Star Ocean games have a really strong action combat element, where with a party where the other characters act on AI and you kind of just direct how you want that AI to function. Like you focus on magic, you focus on defense, have a similar bent. But I never felt like Tales was in the same sphere, because you could A, control your player character, and B, hit the trigger to switch to the other characters and control them directly if you wished. So it's not quite the same thing, because the battle sequence themselves aren't structured around the notion that you are directing combat rather than participating in it. Like in Tales and Star Ocean, you're still a direct participant and can very much control what happens. Yeah. I think Xenoblade 2 is a good one to bring up in that sort of mold as well, because the AI in that is very good at determining what you are doing as the character that you're playing as. So like Xenoblade 2 is very good at progressing through the combos that you're suggesting. Yes.
and sort of picking the right combos that will create those long chains of things that go on there. So that you've still got an element of choice there, but you are also sort of relying on your party members and sort of trusting them to make the right decisions along the way as well. So that was always an interesting one in that sort of mold for me as well.
Xenoblade 2 is perhaps one of the greatest battle systems ever made. And
it is wonderful.
We could, I mean, we've already been talking for an hour now about RPG combat systems. I could easily do like a 2-hour lecture on like the nuances of Xenoblade 2's combat and like the layers and the possibilities and how engaging it is. It more expertly than any game I've ever played combines active engagement, strategy, and the notion that every battle is a unique puzzle to be solved.
Yeah.
And combines these things in a way where I think about it constantly still. Like still think about Xenoblade 2's like combat and like as a master class and like design.
Yeah.
But it's just another open world anime RPG.
Yeah, I was going to say there are people who hate that game, and I don't really understand.
It's the least hateable game ever made. It's so beautiful. It's so beautifully designed within an inch of its life. It's engaging from a visual and artistic perspective. The cast is literally the most delightful assembly of sweet dum-dums in the history of the genre. Like, I don't need to go off. I'm sorry. I don't mean to rant about like it's so good.
No, it's fine. It's fine. All right, what else have you got on your list then?
What else have I got on my list? I have got on my list Tri-Ace's Resonance of Fate.
Yes. Oh, the game of maths.
Yes. So literally, like, I hope you like geometry. Like, so Resonance of Fate is a very unique breed of RPG that we don't see super often, where like the focus of the entire game is combat. Yeah. There are no real dungeons. The dungeons are just like these menus that you navigate where you go to like floors or rooms. And then each floor or room of the dungeon that you select out of a menu is a combat encounter. So there's a town you can run around in to like customize your characters and collect items and advance the story. But the majority of Tri-Ace is literally just a series of presented battle challenges. So when the meat of the game is its combat, you better bet the combat is designed in an interesting way. And this is all going back to what I was saying earlier about Tri-Ace. So Resonance of Fate is available on the PS3, I think the 360. But then it's also been recently remastered and available. It's also recently been remastered and is available on current consoles. So the whole thing with Resonance of Fate is like, hey kids, did you love The Matrix and or Equilibrium? Do you think like fancy gunplay is cool? Would you like to play an RPG all about acrobatic gunplay where like guns are highly fetishized? Like that's Tri-Ace. I'm not Tri-Ace. That's Resonance. That's Tri-Ace's Resonance of Fate. I keep calling the game Tri-Ace. I think because fucking triangles are so important in Resonance of Fate.
Yes.
So the whole idea behind Resonance of Fate is like all the weapons are guns. Like when you collect and buy weapons, you collect guns and you modify guns, new sights, new barrels, new stocks. It's like the Call of Duty of RPGs. Combat in Resonance of Fate is all about orchestrating the battlefield. So each battle you are given a field and there's cover, boxes, platforms of different elevation, and when it's your turn, you move your character across the battlefield by like drawing a line. The character will run along that line, and they will attack enemies with their guns as they run past the enemies.
Yeah.
So every character has a different style of gun. Like one character uses like handguns, one character uses like semi-machine guns. And they have varying ranges, they have different strengths and weaknesses, and they have different things they can do. So like if you run a character like directly through an enemy, they will run to the enemy, jump over the enemy, do like an acrobatic backflip, like rain bullets down on them from above. they might do a lot of damage to that enemy if that enemy's not wearing a helmet or protecting itself from overhead. So you have to pay attention to stuff like that. Likewise, they may run, if you just have them run by an enemy, they'll fire at that enemy as they run by it and then like jump and take cover. Like they'll do less damage, but they'll be exposing themselves less because they'll be moving, right? Then that builds the notion of enemy placement and understanding where the enemies are and the character on the field, because the movement of your characters and your ability to create scenarios where they will be positioned in certain formations or their lines may cross, intersect, or draw shapes allows you to pull off like special like team attacks of like different effects.
Okay.
So it's all about understanding where your friends are in position to each other and where the enemies are in position to the positions of your friends. So like, can you draw a clean triangle that encloses an enemy with all three characters? Right? And then they'll do like a Persona style like team up where they'll all just like unload. Like, yeah. And you feel like a goddamn genius when you make this stuff happen. It's really, really rewarding, but also extremely challenging. It is one of those games where you need to sit through tutorials for like an hour and a half to like properly understand the game. But if you are a mechanics guy or gal, Resonance of Fate is a game for you because it is very challenging and it is focused entirely on its combat system. It's also a really neat world with a really neat narrative. There's a cool focus on like style, like collecting clothing, like stylish clothing, which is really cool. But yeah, it's just you mod your guns to have different effects in battle, and then you just fight and fight and fight, and like stretch the limits of this system to survive and win in different ways. And people hated it.
Surprise. That's one of those games that sort of people hated back in the day, but as soon as they announced a remaster, there were lots of people who were going, "Oh my god, I love this game!"
Yeah, well, like guys like you and me crawling out of the woodwork. Like, it was like critically panned. I think like the people hate. It was like the age of like, I'm too smart for video games when like this first came out, and it's like because like I think there was a character whose like name was like a thinly veiled like masturbation joke. So like every review was just like, I hate this guy. Aren't we better than this? It's like no. How about you focus on the goddamn ingenious combat design that defines this game instead of like being angry because like one character's name is a dick joke. like okay, that's stupid. I didn't like it either, but like I do appreciate the master class in unique strategy that the rest of the game is. Like, so maybe don't give it a 7 because you think one joke fell flat, you dum-dums. Yeah, it's a really, really cool game. Very different. Once again, just like when I was talking about with Guardians Crusade, I've never seen its like again. I've never seen anything that does what this game does. Tri-Ace takes gambles. Always has. I don't really know what they're doing anymore. Just making like crappy mobile phone versions of Valkyrie Profile because that's what all great design studios do now. But
yes, sad but true.
But they used to be like the masters of unique combat and design elements in the genre. This is one of their last greats, like their last true greats. Like I know there's a Star Ocean on the PS4, but like it wasn't super special. This was one of their last great experimental games. Yeah,
we'll definitely have to give that a go at some point. It's one that I know you're going to have to spend a lot of time with to sort of really appreciate and understand and get the best out of it. So, I've held off on it so far, but it's one that's been sitting on my shelf waiting for me for quite a while. So, at some point, as with so many other things.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. It really makes you... It's a much like we were talking about with Xenosaga 2, or Xenoblade 2. It's just when you do it right and you engage with the combat on its own terms, you learn the rules and you execute properly, it makes you feel like the smartest person on the planet. Yeah. And it's really delightful. Yeah, so that's Resonance of Fate. really cool game. That's really the last major title I had that I wanted to dig into in particular depth. I just had kind of one more little note about a general mechanic that I like, which is games where there's an active time-focused element.
Okay.
Stuff like Mario RPG, Paper Mario, Mario and Luigi, Legend of Dragoon, where like you press A to like do additional damage, like with the right timing, or like you know, or like defend with timing. Like, how do you feel about those games that have that? I really think that's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like it because it sort of creates a feeling of additional involvement in it, and like I've enjoyed this ever since Final Fantasy VIII did it.
Yeah, with the Gunblade.
Yeah, exactly. It just gave a much stronger feeling of impact to attacks.
Yeah,
because you as your character is hitting something, you're hitting something as well, and it just gives this really nice sort of physical feeling to it as well. It makes you feel a lot more involved in it. So yeah, I'm a big fan of this, and the character swapping mechanic I talked about with Khemia very much has that feel to it as well, because that's all sort of timing based as well.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, really, really like when games do this. Like Legend of Dragoon had those cool like boxes that would like show up with like the right timing. Like they would like circle in, and you had to hit it like with when it lit up the right color. Like I love that stuff.
Oh yeah, that's right. Was that the one where you had to sort of do sort of various button combinations as well?
I think so.
Else? Yeah.
No, I think so. Like for like some of the special
I've never actually
moves.
played the full version of Legend of Dragoon. I've played a demo, I think, at some point. But yeah, I have a vague memory of sort of having to put in sort of vaguely fighting game style button combinations at various points as well.
Legend of Dragoon is like a game people love to hate.
Yeah.
Like it's one of those games that like retroactively people are like, it wasn't very good. It was just trying to be Final Fantasy VII, but the plot's generic and whatever. But like I know people who love this game. Like I know people like it's fun, it's great. Like and it's one of those games like people are like, oh, we need a new Legend of Dragoon, and like all like the folks come out of the woodwork like the Sonic was never good, people. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. Legend of Dragoon was generic garbage with like crappy pre-rendered backgrounds and a generic plot, and the characters had no personalities. You know what it also was? A fun video game you could play.
Yeah.
Like, so eat a butt. Like, I don't care.
If I remember rightly, I think someone I'm following on Twitter is playing through it right now. So yeah, it's still got people who love it. So
like, is it great? No. Is it A+? No. It's like a solid B tier like RPG with like a cool setting and fun design, and it's got dragons and dragon armor. I don't know. Learn to enjoy life. Play Legend of Dragoon. Enjoy.
Never. I must moan on the internet all day and not enjoy anything ever.
No. So yeah, that's all I've got. Any other games that you wanted to bring up?
No, I think we're good. I think that's a fairly comprehensive coverage of a variety of different interesting games there. So yeah, and all different to the ones we talked about last time as well. So that's great. So yeah, check all those games out if you get the opportunity to. Some of them are a little harder to find these days than others, particularly like the Atelier Iris games and Khemia games, unfortunately, are a little bit harder to get hold of these days. I think you said Khemia you can get hold of reasonably easily, but
the first one is quite inexpensive, but the second one I think was printed in much lower quantities. So it's one of those games where like used copies are going for what new copies were at launch, kind of thing.
Yeah. Atelier Iris 1, 2, and 3 have all kind of reached that stage here now. They were about sort of £20 when I picked them up a few years back, but they've kind of gone up in price quite a bit recently. So they're still out there, but you just might have to pay a bit more than you might be used to paying for PS2 games for them. But they're well worth your time. Well worth your time and money, especially if you enjoy substantial RPGs. Atelier Iris 3 was like 50 hours. I'm not expecting that from an Atelier game. Like I'm used to Atelier games being like 20 hours. And then that one went and devoured 50 hours of my life.
That's a great game.
I loved it. Anyway, all right. So let's wrap that up there for now then. So, would you like to tell people where to find you online?
Sure. As always, you can find my artwork at mrgilderpixels.com, as well as on Instagram as mrgilderpixels, where I always post my work in progress stuff as well as finished pieces.
Marvellous. And you can find me on MoeGamer.net writing about stuff every weekday, and on YouTube doing various things, including the Atari A to Z series of Atari 8-bit, Atari ST, and Atari home console games. I've started a new video series on YouTube recently called Short Play as well, which is sort of quick tours of about half an hour or so of games that I just like, that I feel like talking about. So check that out if you get the chance. It'll
super
be
pleasant.
A variety of different things covered on there over the coming weeks. And the Final Fantasy Marathon continues on Fridays as well. If you are watching this on YouTube, you can also subscribe to an audio-only version on SoundCloud. And if you're listening on SoundCloud, you can subscribe to me on YouTube to see a video version of this podcast and all the stuff I just mentioned as well. So, just remains for us to say, as always, thank you very much for watching and or listening, and we'll see you again next time. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please help out the channel by leaving a like or a comment and subscribing. Be sure to check out MoeGamer.net for new articles on Japanese and Japanese-inspired video games, new and old, every weekday. Every month, MoeGamer features an in-depth exploration of an individual game or series as its cover game, so be sure to check the archives to see if your favourite has had a deep dive yet. If you'd like to support the site directly, please consider becoming a patron or buying me a coffee. You can find links to do both down in the video description. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.